Welcome to the Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2025. This webinar is a collaboration between Pro Bono SG, the 5 Community Development Councils, National University of Singapore Faculty of Law, Singapore University of Social Sciences School of Law, the Singapore Management University School of Law, the Singapore Corporate Council Association Pro Bono Chapter, and the Singapore Association of Social Workers supported by the People's Association. My name is Gabriel Lee and I'm your host for today's webinar. I would like to introduce our wonderful panelists for today who are here with us despite it being Mid-Autumn Festival, Mr. Jonathan Lay, Mr. Benjamin Goh, and Miss Michele Wooi. Jonathan currently serves with Temasek Foundation in the Community Networks and Partnerships team, where he co-leads strategic partnerships and program development to cultivate sustainable social innovations and ventures that address systemic gaps in vulnerable communities with a strong focus on persons with disabilities. To date, his work experiences span across philanthropy, healthcare transformation, strategy consulting, and innovations across Asia. Benjamin, of course, my close friend, is a commercial disputes and employment lawyer from Drew and Napier. He helps businesses and individuals navigate conflicts from broken contracts to workplace fallouts. Now, Michele is the Deputy Director of the Segment and Market Development Team in the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre, NVPC, where she drives strategies to grow giving on the national donation and volunteer platform giving.sg. Engaging about 600 charities, Michele helps them achieve their fundraising target and volunteer needs. Prior to this role, Michele led the Bagus Together team in connecting change makers and ground-ups, fostering collaboration, and providing the resources and support needed to launch and sustain impactful initiatives. Jonathan, Benjamin, Michele, thank you for taking the time to speak today. So today's webinar will be really presented in 5 main segments. We will be touching on first, part 1, the legal composition of a ground-up initiative, what it means to be a ground-up. Part 2, we'll go through the 3 life stages of a ground-up, so early, middle, and mature stages, right? So at each stage, the legal issues that might arise might be a bit different. Then we will have a sharing from Michele and Jonathan to share about the programs that both the NVPC and the Temasek Foundation teams can do and how Bagus Together and Temasek Foundation can really help your startup. We will then end off with a Q&A segment for questions that we did not manage to cover in the course of the webinar. So let's get started. Benjamin, can you share with our audience on what is a ground-up initiative?
Well, thanks, Gabriel. I think that's a great question to start with. When I think about what grows from the ground up, I think about a seed, and typically you walk around in your community and you may see gaps or needs, and a seed thought or a seed idea drops into your head about how to meet those needs and those gaps. And that leads you to create an initiative, a movement, just an avenue for people to come and volunteer and do good. And I think that's really what ground ups are. You take that seed and intend to do good. You sow it in the soil of your community, and from there it just sprouts. It sprouts into a seedling, and as it grows, more people come, and it grows into a plant or even a tree. And that really covers a wide range of activities. You can have neighborhood welfare drives. You can have pop-up fundraising for good causes. So anything that arises from seed ideas and seed thoughts, I would say, are ground-ups.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. Now that we understand a little bit more about what this ground-up idea is, right? Can you explain, Benjamin, why the legal toolkit matters?
Yeah, so you may have very good intentions in starting a ground-up, but the moment you have some form of structure, the moment people are involved, then that structure and visibility and conduct creates legal consequences. And a broad overview of some of the legal issues that may arise, and which we'll go through some of them in this webinar, include things like not having a separate legal personality. So typically when a company would engage in activities, that company is seen as a separate person from the individuals that run that company. If you have a ground up and you don't have a company or an entity to represent you, you're doing things on your own. And in your personal capacity, then that entails risk, that entails liability, vulnerability. because you'd be contracting with vendors on your own. You'd be inviting people to attend events on your own. And if things go wrong, which is unfortunate, but it may happen, then liability falls to you personally. There may be other issues that arise, like when you want to raise funds. Do you have the right permits? Do you have the right disclosures? You're collecting data of volunteers. Are you doing so in the right way, with the right consent, under the personal data protection rules in Singapore? And let's say you have an event and someone gets injured. Negligence and safety issues may arise. And then when you're working with volunteers, if the relationship develops and you start paying them money on a regular basis, would they then transition from being a volunteer to an employee? And would that then make you an employer? So these are all just some of the issues that may arise when you initiate a ground up.
Oh, no, thanks for that, Benjamin. I thought that was quite a good bird's eye view of this ground up idea and the entity, right? So I think to move on to the next part of the webinar, we would like to kind of study the 3 life stages, right? And the thinking behind this is because there are different legal issues that arise at each stage, right? So Michele, can you let us know more about these 3 stages of a ground up, and how do we think about the 3 life stages?
Sure, happy to. Hi everyone, Michele here. Let me share with you how we categorize our ground out journey. We have actually 3 life stages. From the very first one, which is the starting. This is where most of us have ideas, maybe issues that we see need to be addressed in the community, and we need to do something about it, or we feel that something needs to be done. That's when somebody starts, and we rally maybe a group of friends or family to come together to do something about it. We rally a bit of resources to start implementing the solution, and we implement it in the community and engage beneficiaries or people that can benefit from it. So that's the starting phase of a ground up. Some of you may resonate with it. Whereas when you're a bit more stable and you've tried implementing your solution a few more times and run your ground up a bit longer, we call it the sustaining or the growing phase. And that's where really the focus is not so much on the ideation or solutioning anymore, but really the execution and the being very regular about it and making sure that it benefits the community. So more of the focus will be looking at finding resources to make sure your ground up can be sustained, be it volunteers, be it funds, and also increasing the publicity of your initiative so that people come and support you. So that's the second phase of it. And the last one we notice is when grown-ups really start to grow really big. And grown-ups sometimes want to apply for grants, or they look for corporate sponsors. And some of these corporate sponsors or grantors want to actually have a registered entity. Then some of the grown-ups really consider registering. Or some of you grow very big and you start to receive a very big funding from the public, and you want to be accountable. And some of the grown-ups actually register for that. So these are the 3 stages, briefly, that actually summarize the life stage of grown-ups.
Okay, no, thanks, Michele. I think that's actually a very good and intuitive way to think about your ground ups, right? You put them into 3 buckets, right? Early, middle, and late. And then at each stage, different issues arise. So, and in a very commonsensical way, and if we look at the pigeonhole, right, the question already arises. How do you fundraise? So, Michele, why don't you share with us a little bit, right, at the beginning, right? Let's start with the most impending issue, money, right?
Yes.
I need funds to get my ground up, my ground up initiative off the ground, literally, right? How do we go about thinking about that at the early stage?
Yes, absolutely. So everything needs money, right? We are very realistic in Singapore. And so we get asked this question a lot. The number one question that we are always asked is, can grown-ups fundraise? And yes, grown-ups can fundraise, but there are certain things and certain principles we should abide by. So first of all, be very transparent, okay, when you're fundraising, especially from the public. Even if it includes family or friends, usually we start from there. Most of us actually ask our friends and family, right, to contribute a little bit so that we can start our project. Be very transparent on what you're going to use the funds for, the purpose of it, and especially if you're doing it in the public or online or offline, be also very transparent about the money and what it's going to use for. Secondly is accountability. This is very, very important because especially so because we are not a registered entity at this point, right? So we want to build our credibility and trust. And to do that, we want to show that we can be accountable. So keep your receipts, keep your records of your expenditure very, very tightly. Even to the point where if you can set up a separate bank account, that'd be best. But we know that many of you can't. So many people use personal accounts. So all the more being accountable is very important. Thirdly, if we are collecting funding for overseas causes, right, or from the public, or you're going street collection or door to door, there are certain permits that are required. Right, overseas, I believe the charities unit has a permit that you need to acquire, and if you're doing it in public, I believe the license comes from the Singapore Police Force. So these are some of the things we really need to take note of when you fundraise. Of course, there are other sources of funds as well, but we are not going to cover those here. And those include, for example, things like grants. Back to you, Gabriel.
Okay. No, that was quite a helpful overview, right? So now just thinking through that process, right? You've gotten some funds, you are ready to run your operations for your ground up initiative, right? Maybe we can ask Benjamin, right? What are some things you need to consider when running your operations,
Yeah, so I think a big issue that comes to mind is that of negligence. When you host an event, a ground-up initiative, people will come to your event, and negligence, in simple terms, just means you owe a duty to take care of the people that are next to you. And when someone comes to an event, a ground-up initiative, and then for some reason gets injured, liability can arise, right? Because that person will be looking for recourse. And as the organizer of a ground up, you can be liable for injuries to volunteers or even members of the public, even if your ground up is very informal. So to mitigate those risks, I think it's often good to do a risk assessment of the potential safety hazards that may arise in your event, and do things like conduct a safety briefing, have emergency contacts and a first aid kit ready on hand in the event of any medical emergencies. Make sure that you document your steps taken, even your risk assessments. And when you are working with people who come to the event, then it's often good to have some form of documentation in terms of your waivers, to say that you won't be liable in the event that there certain issues may happen. That way you protect yourself, because especially at the early stage, you're not an entity. You don't have a separate legal personality. You can't say that this was liability that falls to the company and not to me. If you are a founder operating in your personal capacity, then liability can come to you in your personal capacity. So I think that's quite a key area to take note of.
Okay. No, I think that's a great way to go about thinking about it, right? So, I mean, now that we've considered some operations, right, Jonathan, do you think like it's too early to start thinking about governance and credibility at the early stage of a ground-up initiative?
Yeah, first and foremost, good evening, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be invited for this sharing. So I think, Gabriel, back to your question, I think it's never too late to start thinking from day one. Like any founders in any startup space, you must have a vision, you must have a strategic direction, because it helps you articulate why you're building it and what you are actually building. So when challenges come, right, actually such a vision helps keep you on track and keeps your team motivated. And that's it. The balance is actually about how you dream big. So a big vision actually needs to be paired with very grounded execution. The execution means breaking your dream into actionable, achievable steps, validating assumptions, and also showing traction along the way. To give you one example, we know, I mean, there's this ground-up group called the Resonance Project. So this Resonance Project, right, in short, it was founded called Rezo, and they were founded in 2021. It was founded by two teenagers. I think back then I was 16 years old. I'm probably like still thinking about my studies. But I think these two individuals actually led a youth-initiated volunteer-run collective. And the intent was actually to leverage on passion of music to bring it to the community, providing free music lessons to the underprivileged children, and then bringing together volunteers aged around 13 to 19 to teach them instruments, to run programs, to operate like a community. And over time, they've actually successfully involved youth from 45 schools and above, and across Singapore with over 700 youths, active and alumni. And I think what actually caught my eye is actually for this ground-up to be successful, building trust is critical. Because I think, as Benji was mentioning, you are actually operating as a personal capacity. So you must be able to build trust, whether is it internally or is it externally. So for Rezo, right, actually their volunteer management is quite well done in my opinion, because the founders actually emphasize on internal relationships, mentorships, giving purpose to volunteers beyond just task work. And they also formalize roles, training, and also internal bonding, so that there's also succession mechanisms, such that when the founding volunteers aged out, there's a replacement. So, and then despite in their teens, right, they also managed to build credibility with the public, where they actually work with established social service organizations and give them the legitimacy to actually get access to the beneficiaries. So I think that's what I think, which is actually operating a vision with a very executable kind of mindset.
Wow. No, I think that's a very interesting notion, right? The fact that usually people think about corporate governance and trust, and they say like, oh, I need an incorporated entity. But I think from your sharing, I think it's quite clear that even when you are unincorporated and you're ground up, all the more you need to have like some trust being built, right? And I think that brings us very nicely to another question from the floor, right? And this one is posed to you, Benjamin. What are some ways that, or some things that you need to take note of when promoting your ground up initiative?
Yeah, so when you're promoting, a big part of it is social media. I mean, you're going to want to put posts out to spread the word about what you do, why you do what you do. That involves designs, pictures, words. And so if you're creating content, that actually, in the eyes of the law, is a form of intellectual property. And you would want to safeguard that. You also want to be mindful of not infringing other people's intellectual property rights. So if you're taking images from third parties without their permission, then that's a potential issue, right? If you're not designing everything yourself. So make sure you verify that the intellectual property, the designs, the pictures that you use are usable to begin with. I think another aspect is if you were to organize an event, then obviously you want to take photos. You want to get the word out that this is happening, so that in future, when you do more events, people would be able to come. And when you take a photo of someone, it may not be apparent, but it's actually a form of personal data that's regulated by the Personal Data Protection Act, which governs all data that can be used to identify an individual. And so a picture of someone is data that can be used to identify an individual. And so when you want to take photos, then I think, you have to be mindful of that as well. You should put in the sign-up form an option for them to consent to their photos being taken. You should have notices at the event saying that your photos will be taken. And when it comes to collecting personal data, you should collect just the bare minimum. If it's just a name, their handphone number, their email, that should be sufficient. Then don't go on to ask for their NRIC and their date of birth, and other things like that.
Okay. No, those are certainly very important tips, right, for very early stage startup, ground up. And I think maybe now that we focus quite a bit on the early stage of ground up initiatives, we can take a next step to focus on the middle stage, right, where ground ups are a little bit more established. So maybe we can start with you, Jonathan. what are some potential legal issues that a ground up in that middle stage might face?
Okay, so I guess for more mature ground-ups, right, it usually means that they've probably gone beyond small pilots and they are handling more volunteers, more beneficiaries, more money, more partnerships. So I think the risk of, let's say, liabilities and negligence, regulatory compliance, operational risk may also escalate over time. So at this current stage, I think the founder also needs to determine what are your next steps. So what do you mean by that is actually, do you still want to retain as a ground-up group? This is in a larger scale. Or you want to evolve to become an institutional as entity? Because these two approaches often have trade-offs between staying as a larger ground-up group or as a registered entity itself. So regardless of what direction you choose to be in, I think one common legal issue that lies in accountability of, especially for finances or even non-financial resources. So give example. So for funding or financial related matters, you may want to consider a very dedicated bank account and also a transparent accounting line to ensure that the disbursement and utilization of your funds are accurately reported and also transparent in terms of your record keeping. When we talk about from a non-financial matters perspective, you may talk about volunteer management. So when you bring on board new volunteers, you probably may want to consider some form of volunteer kind of agreement. So there's a code of conduct, there's some indemnity, there's a duty of care, so that I think if anything happens, there's some sort of risk management in place.
Okay, no, that is actually echoes a little bit more about the discussion about fundraising at the early stage, right? But I can see that it's a lot more formalized, right? Dedicated bank accounts and different things. So maybe we can pick on that idea again of PDPA and data governance, right, Michele? How would that differ for middle stage ground up initiative?
So as Jonathan mentioned just now, I guess we'll be dealing with a lot more data of beneficiaries, volunteers, right? And a lot more activity in general. So with the increase in volume, perhaps, one simple idea could be creating a data map where you map the process flow of how your data is flowing so as to see where the data is flowing and who has access to these data, right? Because it's very important to consider that who has access to personal data. General data, not so much, but it's the personal data. So because you have volunteers, for example, who are helping you with your activities, who are these volunteers who have access to these data? So we should not have everyone having access, but maybe restricting it to certain key volunteers. So that's one idea that we could think of that may help those of you who may be a little bit more mature and collecting a bit more data in your activities. I think the other thing is using, for example, when you are growing, you might also be using more vendors in executing your services and entering into more contracts, I would say. And for some of these services, you may want to think of whether, insurance is really required, right? To protect yourself or your beneficiaries or volunteers. And lastly, I think when you look at the contracts, right, with volunteers as well, maybe something to think about is if, let's say, you get your volunteers to create some content, right, marketing content, for example, who has the rights to use this content? It's better to be transparent upfront and have an agreement with your volunteer on whether you can use it, whether you can own it in future as well. It's always better to be transparent and have that agreement upfront, be it with vendors or with volunteers.
Okay, no, thanks, Michele, for that sharing, right? So in line with that, again, I'm thinking about this idea of a middle stage ground up that's, more formal, being able to raise more funds. One thing that comes to mind is manpower, right? You get a lot more volunteers. So this one is Benjamin's pet topic, right? So Benjamin, I want to ask you, what employment considerations do you, really need to have at this stage?
Yeah, so when you're working with volunteers, and you pay them money, for example, or they come regularly and subject to your control. They work, typical, almost like an employee, 9 to 5. They come into your office space or your house and just do work for your grown up. then I think the potential issue is that the volunteer may be seen as an employee. And when you have such control and you make payments, almost like salary to the individual, and if they are construed in substance as an employee, then that changes the dynamics very significantly, because as an employer, now you're liable to make CPF contributions. You are the subject of potential wrongful dismissal claims if you decide to end that relationship with the volunteer. And then if you're working with foreigners as well, the rule in Singapore is that if you're a foreigner, you can't conduct any work unless you have a work pass. And if that foreigner is now your employee and you don't have a work pass from the Ministry of Manpower, then that invites further liability. So I think it's really important to get the documentation in place, that you have a volunteer agreement, and that agreement must state clearly the relationship between the parties, that it's not an employment relationship. But, in Singapore, we don't just care about the form, we look at the substance as well. And I think in practice, you shouldn't be treating that individual like an employee. You shouldn't be giving that individual annual leave or paid time off, for example. You shouldn't be making regular payments that look like salary into that individual's bank account. If you have, expenses and you want to reimburse that individual from time to time, I think that's fine. But I think it's important to guard against a volunteer being construed as an employee.
Okay. So maybe we can switch gears a little bit, right, to talk a little bit more about trust and governance. So as we grow, and this is posed to Jonathan, there needs to be more policies and procedures that are put in place. So what advice do you have for Ground Up at this middle stage of growth?
So previously, I was touching upon the importance of financial accountability, like keeping your bookkeeping transparent. But I think I'm going to talk a little bit about data management, which I think Michele has earlier talked about. I think as the Ground Up group expands, you probably will expect scope of impact also expands over time. And oftentimes, you probably will deal with sensitive information as part of your reporting obligations to your partners or your funders. So some of the quick principles that you may want to consider is, number one, I think Benjamin was touching a bit earlier in the conversation, is about collect what you only need. So limit the scope of your data collection. Be transparent. Tell people actually what exactly you're doing with the data for. Make security proportionate. So in simplistic terms, what it means is limit data access by role. So only specific individuals have access to sensitive information. Plan for also a turnover. It's not just for this particular generation or this cycle of volunteers, but I think as volunteers and founders may change over time. So you must make sure that processes are in place to ensure that transferability of the data from one to the other is well taken care of. And I think also, as the Ground Up group grows, also iterate, start simple, tighten as you grow. So, and what you actually want to avoid is the risk of mishandling of sensitive information. So to give you an example, right? So the Achievers, which is one of the Institute of Mental Health's longest serving volunteer groups. They were established in 1999. So this group has actually grown to 400 volunteers who work with long-stay patients with mental health distress at the IMH Institute, doing a lot of walk visits, organizing events, and aiming to reduce stigma itself. So as part of maybe one key consideration is because mental health is quite a sensitive topic. So I think what they have cleverly done is actually partner with an established organization like IMH and leverage on the existing systems to help manage their beneficiary information. So that as a Ground Up, you just purely focus on delivering the service rather than managing the information itself. So in a way, you're also limiting data access to all the volunteers.
Okay. I think that wraps up for me quite nicely this idea of a middle stage Ground Up initiative. Maybe now we can start talking about a mature stage Ground Up initiative, right? And at this stage, maybe we can start with Benjamin. Yeah. What are some of your experiences with such Ground Up initiatives, and what are some triggers that would cause founders to want to formalize?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we were just, having some conversations with founders recently, and they were sharing that they've raised funds, but the funds were held in their personal bank account. right? Because they didn't have an entity that they could use to register a bank account. And then those funds that were raised were mingled with their personal funds, and it just gets a bit messy, hard to manage. And so that's one trigger. You're raising a lot of money. You want everything to do with money to be very handled in a very transparent and above board way. And then another founder was sharing that she was passionate about food and, started this ground up to really preserve the heritage of traditional food. And her passion was in conducting workshops for children to teach them how to cook and prepare these traditional dishes. But to conduct that workshop, she actually needs a space. And so, that brings in leasing considerations. And you want to lease, but you don't want to do so in your personal capacity. You may need an entity to help you do that, so that you ring fence the risks and the payments of the lease payments. And then if you're growing, you want to get staff on board, you want to scale your ground up. So I think all of these are very relevant triggers to think about when you are considering taking your ground up to the next stage.
Interesting. No, that's a very good sharing about the triggers for setting up your own mature ground up and formalizing it. But maybe we can talk to Michele, right? What are the options out there for these founders who want to have a formal structure put in place?
So as Benjamin has mentioned, it is good to be clear about why do you want to register your ground up. And there are different options. One of them would be actually a society, and the other one would be a company limited by guarantee. You can actually consider this too. But I'm going to start with actually remaining as a ground up. So there are many pros about remaining as a ground up, right? So if you want flexibility, for example, you want very low administrative duties and in activities. If you want to retain control about what you do, especially if you're a founder that's very, you have an idea that you want to execute in a certain way, you might want to consider being a ground up. Of course, being a ground up would also come with the cons. You will be personally liable. We've covered a few of the points earlier, right? And there are challenges with obtaining certain grants or maybe securing certain corporate partnerships, because some of these entities look for more registered entities to partner with. So that's being a ground up. So yes, you can remain a ground up and it can be beneficial for you. So it really depends on why you want to consider registering. The other two entities, societies and company limited by guarantee, if you are thinking of growing your ground up eventually to be a charity, you can consider one of these two. Or if you just want to register because you want to put in certain processes in place and be a little bit more accountable, you can consider either of this. So for society, it's slightly different. It's member-based, right? And to start a society, you need at least 10 or more founding members to start the society. Then you need to register it, and it comes under the Societies Act, if I'm not wrong. It's regulated by the Societies Act. So there are certain requirements about being a society. You need to hold, I think, an annual meeting with all the members. Decisions are members driven. So the members would actually be the ones to decide what's the decision you take in a society. Very importantly, if you are in a society, members may be personally liable. So it's not that you do not have any more liability, it's that the liability is shared or could be shared among the members. For companies limited by guarantee, slightly different. It's a separate legal entity, of course, and there's limited personal liability. So many grown-ups who want to limit the liability actually consider this. But it does come with certain administrative overheads as well. You have to submit annual returns, and some even with audit. You have to probably employ a secretary to help you. I believe you need a minimum of 2 directors as well. So there are certain costs that comes with this, and we have to be prepared to manage all these as well. So the cost of the setting up the CLG and the paperwork must be considered, because these are ongoing. These are, especially the paperwork and the admin duty, these are not one-off. So these are the pros and cons of being a company limited by guarantee. And if you have a very big dream of registering as a charity, if you reach that, you can offer tax benefits to your donors. That's an additional benefit of being a charity if you reach the IPC status. But there is much, much stricter governance and much more compliance and regulations to follow if you're a charity.
Got it. Got it. No, that's very helpful. Like, let's hold on to that thought of formalizing entities, right? Maybe we can switch gears to pose a question to Jonathan, right, about the practical governance and compliance for more mature ground-up initiatives.
Okay, so for this particular question, I'm probably going to cover 3 key areas. 1, legal and entity compliance. 2, board and governance design. 3, and finance audit and reserves. So I elaborate a bit further on each of these points. So for legal entity compliance, so when you are a mature ground-up group, you probably would be, I'm coming from the context where you are probably established society or even a charity. So essentially, with the legal structure in place, please hire a dedicated administrative person to help do the support to ensure that all the accounting or the ACRA or the commission on charities related matters are done properly. Why is this important? Because any missing or late filing can actually threaten fines. It may even have a potential loss of charitable status, that perspective. And the least that you want to have is actually loss in partner and donor confidence. When you talk about board and governance design, I think what you need to probably think about is about formalizing a board charter, or even like having a committee structure. Why is it? Because you need to ensure that terms of the references, the roles and responsibilities, the processes are clearly articulated. There's little ambiguity along the process, and it's important because as a charity, as a CLG company limited by guarantee, donors and regulators actually expect independent oversight and documented governance practice. The last one, about when we talk about finance and audit and reserves, I think there needs to be a very clear segregation of duties, which means that no single person should actually pay, approve, or even reconcile records, because there's a conflict of interest in that sense. And then especially this is also tied to banking controls, whereby if let's say there's a need to disperse or approve a certain threshold in terms of your funding, right? Disbursement or utilization, I think you may want to consider two signatory rule for disbursements. Okay. So that there's actually some ensuring of the kind of tracking and also the transparency in that sense. And then why is it important? Because I think we want to prevent any misuse of our funds, and this helps in confidence in the funder and also statutory compliance.
Okay, no, that's very interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change it up a little bit, right? Maybe we can start with Benjamin first to talk a little bit more and hear from, the lawyer's perspective, right? On what are some good governance best practices for mature ground-ups, and then we round up this portion with going back to Jonathan to talk about this solution, right? So Benjamin, why don't you share with us what are some additional governance best practices from your perspective?
Yeah, so when you are formalizing your ground up, typically you would then put together a board. And the board composition, I think, matters. You want to match the skills of the board members to what you do. If you have someone from finance, someone from legal, all of them can chip in with their input to take your ground up further. And then as you grow, you're going to have finances come in, fundraising, recognition, and some of the founders we've spoken to are taking this on full time or thinking of taking this on full time. And I think it's important to budget realistically for the founder's remuneration, and also consider having a staged salary approach as the ground up initiative grows. And I think one more thing that I think is important is to build on your relationships at an early stage, whether it's with CDC or with charities. Especially if you are able to latch on to their existing relationships, that certainly can give you a leg up when you're looking to scale. Okay. And then maybe to wrap up this discussion quite nicely, right? Now that we've talked about corporate governance and whatnot, and we touched on this idea actually earlier when Michele shared, right? The idea of remaining a ground up, right? What if you went to put in place, a formal structure and want to consider exiting, right? So maybe we can pick your thoughts on this, Jonathan.
Okay, I'll give my 2 cents. Probably Benjamin may have a better response to this question. But I suppose regardless of what maturity stage you are, as a grown-up, early stage, mature stage, middle stage, I think you need to be aware of several areas. One is actually on the governance and compliance considerations. Because usually when you are mature ground-up group, which is actually your registered society or charity or even CLG, right? You can't just fade away like that in the society, in the background. You must be legally responsible and you must responsibly also dissolve. So some of the obligations that you may want to consider is actually about, let's say, legal entity dissolution. The society, you may need to actually apply to the relevant society or association to deregister, submit the final records, minutes, ensuring that there's no outstanding debts. When you talk about CLG, you may need to apply for ACRA to strike off any of the members' voluntary winding up. Also file for IRAS, I think, and also COC if needed too for clearance. And then you talk about charity itself, definitely you need to inform the Commission of Charities of the intent to dissolve. Because and also remaining assets has to be transferred to another registered charity, or you may want to disperse it back to the beneficiaries itself. So on the second areas of consideration is actually the financial wrap-up. So it's actually we need to ensure that all the accounts are properly closed, wrapped up. There's no unspent restricted grants. And then also prepare some sort of audited or final financial statement. The third one is also about data. We keep talking about data throughout the entire conversation, right? So I think as PDPA, I think it requires you to not keep personal data for specific span of time. You must destroy all anonymized data after exit, unless you are legally required to keep. And then also keeping all the records, whether it's contracts, audited accounts, for a specific number of years in case there's any queries that comes along the way. When we talk about contractual obligations, this where you may have during the entire duration where you have your ground-up or charity, you may have contracts signed. Whether it's staff contracts or even vendor contracts or insurances that you talk about, you may need to communicate very clearly with the donors and partners and also to the relevant stakeholders in terms of notice periods. Then aside from governance and compliance considerations, we also talk about legacy and responsible closure. Because I think the reason why people partners with you is because the credibility and trust that you build over time. So usually this reputation extends beyond its lifespan, even if it close. So I think you may want to consider upon closure, right, any succession plans. Whether if you still feel that this program is still valuable, you may want to consider passing it to another NGO, another partner that you deem is worthy, and then thereafter communicate clearly that the beneficiaries will also continue receiving support if they were to move to another entity under the control. Then we talk about knowledge capture, right? Because I think as a ground-up group, you probably may have pitfalls, you may have learnings along the way. So I think maybe you want to also consider publishing a toolkit, a closure report, just what didn't work. So at least tips for other ground-up groups. So it's a way of contributing back to the ground-up space and the community. And then also this also cements inverted commerce your legacy, right? And also inspire probably new ground-up founders in the pipeline. Yeah, let me talk about volunteer and donor closure, right? So I think we also need to thank them for the contributions and the trust they have given the ground-up so far. And also offer some sort of transparency why you are closing and where these remaining resources will go.
Okay. No, I thought that was very comprehensive and very practical. Yeah, so many considerations put in place, right? So I thought that was super helpful. Perhaps now we can move on to the next part of our sharing, right? And it's really the resources and the avenues that the various ground-ups can obtain when working with entities like Bagus Together and Temasek Foundation. So let's start with you, Michele. Why don't you tell us about the good work that Bagus Together does?
So let me start by just saying that, we've covered a lot of do's and don'ts, a lot of the don'ts, a lot of the liabilities, responsibilities. And I just want to put in a word of encouragement here that, you are not alone. Don't be fearful. What we're trying to do here is really to protect everyone. And that's why we've been sharing all these regulations and information and best practices as well. But yes, don't go away, being very fearful. What we want to do is to support you. And that's what Bagus Together is all about. So the name Bagus Together, right? We took a really long time to come up with the name. And actually, it does stand for Building All Grown-Ups for Success. And this is a tripartite collaboration between NVPC, Tote Board, as well as Temasek Foundation. So we all came together and we decided, yes, this is a worthwhile cause and we want to support all the grown-ups. So the purpose of Bagus Together is really to rally support and the ecosystem behind the grown-ups so that all you change makers out there will be empowered and you have the resources to start and sustain your grown-ups. So Bagus Together is a go-to platform for all change makers and everyone who is starting and sustaining your grown-up. So what does Bagus Together offer? Mainly three main things: resources. We have advisory as well as programs or events. Resources, the key one everyone keeps coming to us is really on space. So what we have done is we've established a grant directory. We go around Singapore looking for people who will support grown-ups at a pro bono or low bono basis, and you can rent the space at a low rate or free of charge. So if you check out our website, which I will share later, you can actually look at some of these spaces for some of your events. For advisory and programs, let me tell you a little bit more with the next slide. But before I do that, the other directory we have is a grants directory. So you see that there's an Oscar fund there, but we actually have a whole directory of a lot of grants, mostly from the government, but grown-ups are applicable to apply for it. So if I go to the next slide, let me tell you a little bit more about the details of the projects. So publicity is one thing we can help you with. If you want to create more awareness, we actually have a partnership with a group of photographers who will help you take pro bono or low bono photos of your events. So just connect with us and we can connect you with that group. We will also help you publicize your event through our channels as well, our Bagus Together channels. So if you're having any events, it's open to public or there's certain demographic of participants you're looking for, you can discuss that with us and we'll see how we can help you. The second big thing we can help you with is volunteers. So NVPC has a national donation and giving platform called giving.sg. Grown-ups can actually utilize that to call for volunteers, and many grown-ups have actually successfully done that. So if you need to understand a little bit more about that, come to us as well. Happy to help. The third one is services, and for services, we have basically a lot of advisory and consults that we can offer. We have this thing called the coffee chat. If you're really not sure about where your grown-up is heading, what you should be doing next, you're not sure about when you're starting your grown-up and is this idea a good idea or not, you're not sure about if you're growing your grown-up and you want to register, what are the considerations you really need to think about, please come to us. We have consultations as well as coffee chats that you can sign up for. Generally, we keep it to an hour, but within an hour, we are always able to cover a lot of grounds and considerations. Yeah, so that's just to kick you off and get you thinking about what you need to think about in some of the considerations you have. The fourth area is actually on productivity. So if you do a lot of marketing, you'll be happy to hear we have Canva. We have an agreement with Canva where actually grown-ups can actually sign up for the, I think they call it premium, corporate or premium account, and it's free of charge for grown-ups. You just need to register with us. We need to verify that you're a legit grown-up and we will connect you with Canva, and you can actually apply for that account. And the last one is about programs where we hold workshops and events. So these workshop and events have many different themes. So in the next slide that I'm going to share with you, I'll share 3 with you. The grown-up exchange that recently happened is really bringing all grown-ups together and having them talk to each other as well as potential partners, and it's really about collaboration. So we try to connect you with the ecosystem so that we can really spark some of these collaborations and partnerships. And the second event that you see right there is Partnerships Foundations. So because grown-ups, right, we need resources to run our initiatives and activities, but we also need resources to do that. Partnerships are a great way to go. It does not always have to be money, right? So be it partnerships with other grown-ups or charities or corporates, we ran this workshop to talk about, the best practices or the tips about, how to win corporates over, how to win other grown-ups over, how to consider what kind of partnerships, how to scope it so that we can be more successful in our partnerships as well. And the third one I want to shout out is about our leadership program. Every year we run this program. It's about 3 months to 4 months long. And we focus on growing 10 to 20 grown-up leaders. We invite them to come and journey with us. And what we do is we help you with the growing of your grown-up from a leadership perspective. So we cover actually several pillars in this program. So leadership is definitely one. Very importantly, the other one is communications, strategy, and systems thinking, right? We want to take a higher level to look at whether, our initiatives and activities are addressing the needs on the grounds in a more systemic level. So that's a few of the things we look at in this ground-up leadership program. So let me round off by sharing with you an upcoming program that you can actually sign up for. It's actually on powering content for volunteer recruitment. And this is a digital changemaker series that we have. It is on 11th of November, so you can see the QR code there. You can scan and find out more about it or register if you're interested. And finally, if you want to connect with us, you can follow us on Instagram, or you can and the various social channels that I'm showing here, or just email us at hey@bagustogether.sg. So that's all from me from Bagus Together. Happy to hear from you at the end of this webinar.
Okay, thanks, Michele. So maybe now we can also focus a little bit more on Temasek Foundation and what are the resources that you can provide?
Okay, so I'll say a bit of code here. But I guess before I share a bit more about Temasek Foundation, I think it's useful to provide a high-level view of the Temasek family tree. Because I think everyone seems, you probably will heard of Temasek Holdings, Temasek Trust, Temasek Foundation. Actually, all seems to say seems to be quite similar. But I just want to let you know that actually the next slide, actually for TT, Temasek Trust, Temasek Foundation, Temasek Holdings, we are all independent, separate entities, which also means that we are governed by prevailing government regulations for our specific jurisdiction, under the current jurisdiction. So Temasek actually does not directly get involved in Temasek Trust and Temasek Foundation's day-to-day operations. And then Temasek Trust and Temasek Foundation have our own respective boards and management teams. So thinking of this way, Temasek Holdings actually generates resources. They earn, they purely invest with pure capital gains, and then they donate a proportion of their returns in the form of endowment gifts. And that's where Temasek Trust comes into play to kind of manage, safeguards, and continue to grow the endowments. Temasek Foundation is the programming engine that curates opportunities and deploys the money to the community. So if you look at the next slide, right, since the inception of Temasek Foundation in 2007, I think we have mobilized our philanthropy capital in a variety of innovative ways, just to pilot solutions that are deemed to address key gaps and underserved needs in Asia, including Singapore. This is only possible with our close partnerships with our 4P partners. This can be public, people, private, and philanthropy sectors. So our work is actually shaped by Temasek's Kupa priorities, and it actually spans across 5 key areas. So the 5 Ps are your people, planet, peace, progress, and partnerships. And in view of today's topic, which is actually focused on grown-up groups, let me just share an example of how we have helped or supported a small and grown-up group to turn into the movement itself. Not sure how many people actually is familiar with the Purple Movement. So this year is happening on the 20th. Yeah, very good, Gabriel. So this year we're having, it's actually, Purple Parade is actually founded by Mayor Denise Phua in 2013. It was an initiative that was under the Central Singapore CDC. So back then in 2013, based on what I know, right, it started off with 4,000 people at Hong Leung Park, especially in the rain. And then last year they have grown to leaps and bounds where we have 15,000 people turning up at Suntec City, 200 organizations, 5,000 people marching to promote inclusivity and celebrating the abilities of persons with disabilities. And a lot of this takes a long time to organize, right? And majority of the organizing committee are also volunteer-led. And essentially, even on the day itself, they also mobilizes quite like 1,000 plus volunteers to help manage the crowd, to help facilitate ushering and so on and so forth. And it was one of the largest social asset that Singapore had. But I think because it's operated by volunteer base, right? It's very hard to be sustainable in that sense. And also fundraising will be a potential problem. So that's why in 2022, that's where TF actually provided some upfront capital to kind of set up, institutionalize the setup of the program office so that there is some legitimacy to actually crowdfund, hire individuals to man or to help facilitate the program curation or the program management of Purple Parade. And of course, later on in 2023, we also provided Purple Parade Limited with an additional regranting amount, a grant called $4 million, called a Life Forward grant. I think the intent is actually to build the capabilities of the Purple Parade Limited to be able to work with various disability groups to prototype solutions that complement existing government efforts, whether it's towards the uplifting of the quality of life in terms of healthy living, independent living, or even lifelong learning. And then, of course, this seed funding also means there's more work to be remained. And that's where we're also working with them to help fundraise so that there's a sustainability in the pipeline moving forward as they build, scale their operations, scale their prototyping efforts in the community itself. And this is what Temasek Foundation does, which is actually to build capabilities of strategic ecosystem partners. In this case, will be the disability sector. So talk about Oscar, right? Which on next slide. So I think 2020, the pandemic was actually a crisis of a generation. So at the point in time, Temasek Foundation was actually was mobilized and then worked with a lot of corporate partners and ground-up groups, community volunteers to work with government agencies where we activate supply chains, sourcing hand sanitizers, and then we distribute masks, whether it's in Singapore or globally. And essentially, these nationwide distributions actually demonstrated how communities and can actually be mobilized and collaborate together to address challenges, even the absence of large-scale institutional support. So arising from this COVID-19, right, we realized that actually people in the community actually wants to contribute in various form and shape, which is actually a crucial part of strengthening the Singapore social fabric of care. And then they're also closer to the ground. They know who's in need, what's happening. You don't need a lot of big solutions. So that's why we're thinking, how can we kind of harness this gotong royong or community spirit again, even post-COVID times? And I think Oscar Fund was actually birthed at that point in time with the goal to strengthen our culture of care. And Oscar actually stands for ownership, sustainability, care, assurance, and resilience. And that's where we have families, mothers, people coming together to support not just as fellow Singaporeans, but migrant workers as well, in various ways and forms. And this is done through some sort of micro philanthropy initiatives, where we give a few $1,000s to help kickstart people doing social good in the community. And I think we also hope that through our Oscar Fund, we're able to achieve or embrace diversity and inclusion, amplify the entire gotong royong kampong spirit, and also bring out the strength of integrating different perspectives, cultures, and abilities, especially when Singapore is one of a kind in that sense. And then in terms of the resources, right? So besides funding, we also provided capability building opportunities like Oscar mentorship incubation, we've seen in the center of the slide, where I think promising grown-up leaders can actually apply and then shortlisted to be mentored so that they are able to strengthen their leadership management capabilities in terms of volunteer management, in terms of organizational development, so that they're able to grow their grown-up impact further down the road. And then for grown-ups with aspirations to actually institutionalize as a charity or even a social enterprise, I think to help jumpstart this whole next phase of their endeavor, right? So we also work with Majority Trust to help provide a very structured approach towards scaffolding the grantees, the grant partners' learnings in their development journey. And also, we also organize very informal sessions like Oscar Socials on the left-hand side, where we facilitate knowledge sharing and networking opportunities for grown-up groups with subject matter experts from the different sectors itself. And then through these interactions, we hope to foster a very organic collaboration, even amongst the grown-up groups. And the last one we want to talk about is the annual event, which is the Oscar Friends and Partnership Appreciation Night. So this is a night where we will actually convene the ground-up groups, the partners, the donors, the potential co-funders and partners to kind of celebrate the achievements that they have done so far, and also to send our appreciation for the donors who have helped these ground-up groups in their entire trajectory. And I think recently we also started this Pledge for Good, which is actually some sort of informal crowdfunding kind of initiative, so that at the end of the day, there's some longevity for some of the ground-up groups that we curate. So you want to know more about our work, join us in our purple contingent, which we are participating this month, and also contact us for more details.
Well, hey, thanks, Jonathan, for that very insightful sharing. Right, I actually really liked it. I never knew that Purple Parade was, so much, so linked to Temasek Foundation and what you do, right? And I really like it because it's purple, and it also happens to start with P. So remember the 5 P's that you shared: people, planet, peace, progress, partnership. It fits in nicely. Purple Parade.
Yeah.
2 more additional P's.
Good.
And I think along with that, we've talked about Bagus together. We've talked about Temasek Foundation. I would also like to spend some time to share a little bit about Pro Bono SG and the wonderful team at this thing called NLS, right? So if you're a ground-up initiative and you need some legal advice, Pro Bono SG is here to help. They have a non-profit legal services, NLS, non-profit legal services, and you will be offered a free 45-minute online consultation with a volunteer lawyer, right? Completely free of charge. So whether you are wondering about questions on how to register a CLG or society, or you just want to better understand some of the liabilities that you have, or some very specific legal questions that are coming through the Pigeonhole Live right now, right? The place to go is really NLS at Pro Bono SG. You can sign up for a legal clinic session or fill up the short form using the link shared in the chat function, or email them again, right, at nls@probono.sg, right? They would love to support the work that you're doing. So I think we've come to the Q&A portion. It's quite nice. We have a little bit of time, right? So thank you, Jonathan, Benjamin, and Michele. Let's consider some of the questions from the floor. I'm mindful that we actually covered a lot of them, but I'll go by votes, right? And this one I think we've talked about, right? So how can an individual, any of you, how can an individual start doing some fundraising for a good cause? What are some tips that you have? I remember you guys mentioned at an early stage, right? I would say an individual use a different bank account. What are other advice that you can share?
Benjamin can add on. So I think before you start, be very clear about the amount that you want to raise and why you want to raise it, the purpose of it, right? Because that will really guide you in how you're gonna seek for your funds. So if it's a small amount and I'm starting off, I would imagine myself, I would look for my friends and family to first. And even then, we have to be, as mentioned, very transparent and very open about really what we're going to use the funds for, and following that, after that, we have to share how the funds have been used as well. And good to share the impact as well, right? Because that builds your credibility. So that's just one thing to think about in terms of funds. There are many ways to actually raise the funds. You can do it informally through your friends and family. You can also do it through various online platforms, which offer some of these services as well. Yeah. But in all of it, very importantly, be transparent and accountable.
Maybe I just add on Michele's point, right? I think when we talk about fundraising, I think donors also want to know where are these funds being channeled. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? What's the output or the indicators like KPI, like in short, that you're going to achieve from the funds that are going to the funds will be put to you for handling. So I think be very clear in terms of what exactly you would be. What donors will be expecting if you were to plow the money, to hand over the money to you.
Okay. No, I thought those were very good responses, right? Maybe I can add one last thing. I thought that was a very good point that was raised several times during the webinar, right? And there's the idea of really segregating bank accounts, whether you're early, you're middle, you're late, right? So I'm guessing the question is really an individual. So I would say I'll place them at an early stage. You might not be able to use a bank account in a different name, like a company limited by guarantees name, but you still have the ability to use like a newly set up bank account. So at least there's segregation between funds that you have raised versus your own funds, right? And then you don't co-mingle the monies into the same bank account. And I think that goes a long way into keeping proper records, because then that account will be all for this grown-up initiative operations, right? Versus some mingle with yours, right? You buy coffee, you take a cab, and then it co-mingles with the funds that you raise from your sponsors, right? And people that have donated towards your cause. I see we don't have much time left, right? So I actually invite each of you to leave us with one very good takeaway message. Anybody want to start?
Yes, I will have 4 key takeaways. One key takeaway. Okay, so I think the first one will be start with clarity of purpose, not just scale. Because I think with a very clear purpose, a clear why, it actually helps you attract volunteers and donors, rather than one with very vague good intentions. Number 2, keep governance simple but sound. I think even at the start, put in basic safeguards. So for example, simple financial tracking with spreadsheets and receipts, conflict of interest declaration, data protection awareness, don't over collect personal information. So because this helps prevent headaches down the road to expand and scale. The third one will be plan for evolution or even exit. And we talked about earlier in the conversation, where think early about what happens if you succeed, and will you scale, will you merge, will you hand over, or will you close? So having this mindset keeps you from clinging to the initiative beyond its usefulness as it grows. And I think last one is actually don't be afraid. That's what Michele shared about just now. There's a lot of resources out there. I think there's no wrong door policy, and also more importantly, enjoy the process.
Maybe I'll go next. So Jonathan, thanks for spoiling market. Their run is for, but yeah, from our experience, if you are ground up and you're just starting, right, it's okay. Start small and pace yourself. Really, what you do not want to do, and we've seen many of these, is really to start and do an event every week. So don't burn yourself out. Take it slow and pace yourself. That's very important when you're starting out. Second one is really to emphasize all of you, you're not alone. We are here, be it Pro Bono SG, Temasek Foundation. I mean, even Benjamin is doing this Pro Bono, and Gabriel as well. So you have many people in the community who are willing to help you. So don't be shy. Just reach out to any of us. Actually, we do work together, Temasek Foundation and us as well. So it's an ecosystem behind you. Yeah. So don't be afraid to reach out. And lastly, I think don't be afraid also when you are carrying out your activities to get feedback, be it with your partners or your beneficiaries or people who serve, as well as volunteers, right? It's always very good to see how we are doing on the ground, and that will improve how we are doing it, the impact that we are creating on the ground as well. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. Benjamin?
Yeah, that's great. I think for me,
we've talked about documentation, we've talked about, protecting yourself. And it can seem like a lot of things to manage, especially if all you're interested in is really just doing good for your community. But I think the takeaway would probably be this. You don't need paperwork to do good. But I think having some paperwork can help you do more good and can help you do it sustainably and can help you do it safely. And that's really the heart of what we are talking about tonight.
Okay. So those are great takeaways. There's a request from the organizers, right? To take on like one or two more questions. So I will pick them out from the list, right? Earlier on we went with the question that had the top number of votes. Maybe we take one from the bottom, and I see a very meaningful one, right? Which I think is very impactful and moves away from this idea of fear and liability and whatnot. And that question really relates to how do ground up founders start to find like-minded people for a same cause? Do you guys have avenues to connect people who want to volunteer towards the same causes? Are there areas where there are social groups, for example? I think this one will be very nicely answered by either Jonathan or you, Michele. Michele first?
I
Go first.
I guess it depends on your personality, right? I think for me, because I would probably go with my friends first, because I think what keeps a ground up going, right, is actually the relationships. Relationships, whether with volunteers, or even the people that you work with, lah. So I think maybe you want to start with that, because that also helps you kind of test bait whether what you are trying to achieve from a ground up initiative makes sense, and whether it gets people interested.
So for me, there are many ways to meet like-minded people, right? I think if I'm not sure, actually one of the first ways I'll do is I'll volunteer. I'll volunteer with another group, which is of a cause that I'm passionate about. So let's say for me it's cats, right? So then I will actually go and volunteer with a cat welfare group or a cat rescue group. And to meet other like-minded people and to hear about their ideas or what they're doing on the ground to make a difference. That'll be one way. If you're starting out, another good way could be hackathons as well. You have ideas. There are certain ideas and solutions that you have to something that you think needs to be done. Hackathons could also be a way of meeting like-minded people who are at the same stage of you at the journey, who really are just thinking about what can be done about certain gaps in the community. That's another way. And the last one is actually on networking, and there's so many, there's no shortage of networking events in the community. Temasek Foundation has a few, so does Bagus Together, as well as many other agencies such as NYC, National Youth Council, YCS Youth Corps as well. So some of the ground-ups also organize events for their causes, and you can also join them in the networking sessions there as well. So there are many. If you're not sure, just reach out to, I guess, Temasek Foundation or Bagus Together for a start, and you can definitely sign up for some of the events and join us.
Yeah. No, I think that really rounds it up very nicely, right? In fact, there are many of these social events, right? There's Oscar Socials, there's this Bagus Together, there's Groundbreakers, there's many avenues for people who are like-minded about volunteering to come together. More often than not, right, you start with thinking of doing good in one area. You want to do the environment. Then you meet all these other people with very interesting ideas, right? And then you start to realize, hey, there are other things that interest me as well.
Yeah.
And it's really wonderful how there's so many groups and social networks really put in place by Temasek Foundation and Bagus to really support founders who want to volunteer, right? So maybe we'll take another question, right? And this one is a very specific one, so I'll water it down, and it really relates to risk, right? About potluck and organizing a potluck and people unfortunately having food poisoning. So let's move away from the specifics of a potluck and people getting food poisoning and saying, you're ground up, right? You're unincorporated at early stage, people get injured during an event. Who's liable? Maybe this is one for Ben.
Yeah, so if you organize a ground up and let's say early stage you're not incorporated, there's a risk that you yourself are personally liable. I mean, if you're dealing with anything, food, even a sports event, where people are running up and down, or children, coming to play under the void deck, and you organize sort of like a relay race, and some of them fall down and get injured. The organizer of the event would typically owe a duty of care to those who come. And if someone gets injured, someone suffers food poisoning, someone gets hurt, that liability can fall to you. So I think it's important to protect yourself with the right mitigating measures. You want to make sure that you conduct all risk assessments. You need to also get consent from the individuals that are attending, that they are aware of the risks. But at the same time, legally, you can't contract out of liability for personal injury or death. That's a statutory requirement in Singapore. So if someone gets injured at your event, you can't say, oh, contractually, I've already excluded myself, I'm not liable. You still have to make sure that you take the appropriate measures to exterminate all risks as far as possible. And that's where the documentation comes in, risk assessments, steps you took to make sure that you can show you discharged your duty of care.
Okay, no, I think that's good, right? And I also want to shift, some of the founders out there away from this idea of risk. Well, very dangerous, don't volunteer, don't do events, right? Essentially, having proper documentation in place does mitigate your risk very well. And more important than having the documentation in place is actually taking steps to ensure that things are safe. So I think earlier on in the webinar, Ben said very aptly, right, that you can do safety checks before you run your volunteer events, right? So if you're doing a beach cleanup, for example, right, you can do a dry run. Go and walk the path first. See, what are some of the risks. Make sure that the participants use like a proper footpath rather than one that's, just in the sand, make them walk on the grass and all that. Then somebody fall down, sprain their ankle, all that. So there are actually practical ways that you can move and manage your risk away from just thinking of the legal documentation, right? And that's actually a lot more, I would say, has a lot more utility because you reduce the actual risk that the participants face, right? So moving away from this concept of just relying on the legal documentation, you can also take practical steps to ensure that the events that you run, the volunteer initiatives that you do are safe ones, right? So maybe we can take another question. And then let me look at it. This one, right? And I don't know whether you guys have the answer because this one's start by the organizers. Do you have a hard funding limit at Temasek or NVPC, or there are very stringent guidelines to grant funding?
Okay, maybe I'll start because NVPC does not provide funding for grown-ups. Unfortunately, we do not have that resource. I know Temasek does, so I'll pass the question over to John.
All right. So for Temasek Foundation, our funding quantums are quite wide-ranging. So because I think it also depends on the scale and the nature of the project or the solutions that we are supporting. But specifically in the area of Oscar, I think it's also when we review proposals or submissions right through the door, I think we'll question the what's the impact. What's the scale of the impact that you are creating, and whether the amount that you have asked for justifies the scale. And I think the second order question is actually looking at the specifics of what the cost items are, because I think some of the costs are quite may not be consequential to the entire impact that in terms of the impact you're trying to create here. So I think it depends. It can become, to give you a sense, it can be from a few $1,000s to even a 6-digit, up to 6-digit. But I think as the quantum of funding increases, the stringency of each proposal will also escalate accordingly.
Let me add, maybe I know that there are funds. Okay, if you are studying ground up and you just want seed funding, I know that PA, for example, they have a fund. I think it's capped at 1,000 for you to kickstart projects. Several of the government agencies actually have this as well. If you are youth, you can actually approach National Youth Council. I believe they have this fund called I think Young Changemakers Fund, where you can pitch, and I think the quantum is up to 5K. So those are the lower ones, and really mostly is for those who are starting. If you are a more mature grown up, then you're probably looking for higher quantums. Then yes, Jonathan is right. There are several funds, but what they ask for would probably be a lot more as well. But that's fine, because you probably at the stage would already be able to adjust your activities or have grown to a stage where you probably will be able to carry that out as well.
Okay. So unfortunately, we have time constraints. We have to bring our Q&A session to a close. So thanks all. Thank you to all the speakers, right? Jonathan, Benjamin, Michele. I thought that was great. I really enjoyed myself. We have to bring our Q&A session to a close. So our next webinar actually will be on planning ahead, wills, LPAs, and end-of-life matters civil law. Happening on Wednesday, the 8th of October at 7:30 p.m. The session will explain how wills, lasting powers of attorney, and advanced care planning work, and how they protect your wishes and ease the burden on your family. You will learn what to consider when drafting a will, how to appoint someone you trust to act in your behalf, and where to seek guidance on medical and care-related decisions. Whether you're just getting started or reviewing your existing plans, this session will give you the clarity to make informed choices for the future. This and many more webinars are part of the Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2025. You can click on the link shared in the chat function to visit the website to register for the next webinar or the many more webinars available. If you have missed any of the webinars and wish to catch the ones you missed, the recordings are available and will be made available on Pro Bono SG's YouTube channel 2 weeks after the end of the live webinar. You can check out the channel on YouTube. After today's fantastic sharing from our panelists, you will find that you require, if you find you require legal advice, you can always go to help@probono.sg, help@probono.sg. And as shared earlier, you can always write to nls@probono.sg if you need professional legal advice regarding your ground up initiative. Last but not least, I must again express my gratitude to Jonathan, Benjamin, and Michele. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your time. With that, on behalf of Pro Bono SG, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
everyone.